I lived here and you stole this house from me.
Bad things happen and people's lives are broken.
I think for Kathy, it's it's so much more than just the house.
I'm your husband. Fiona, it's Grant. We've been married for 45 years.
People are faced with difficult decisions when their lives fall apart.
You'll never find another love. Not like this. Nothing will ever be there for him this way.
This baby's sick and he needs a hot drink.
Even when life seems hopeless, people try to survive.
How did she manage? She hung on. That's all you could do in those days.
Broken lives, on this episode of Books into Film.
Now the house is up for auction tomorrow morning.
Auction? Are you out of your mind?
Films about broken lives show us how people respond to their worst day.
I think people like to learn from other people's mistakes, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons that people enjoy reading stories about people that are screwing up in their lives.
Any movie that taps into a deep well of emotion is going to be interesting to watch.
I miss my dad. He worked really hard for that house. It took him 30 years to pay it off.
House of Sand and Fog is a story about a young woman who loses her house and will do anything to get it back.
She feels, I think, that she's messed up most everything else. Her marriage, her relationship with her parents, she doesn't really have a career.
Kathy's an alcoholic. I mean, how much more depressed do you want to be than to be an alcoholic, divorced woman with no real job?
I don't have anywhere to live. I mean, I can't even afford a motel anymore.
I think for Kathy, it's it's so much more than just the house. It's sort of the house is losing the house is sort of whether she can hold on to it or not is sort of an index of her success or failure in life, really.
Writing heart-wrenching stories comes naturally to author Andre Dubus III.
Andre Dubus III wrote House of Sand and Fog while he was parked in his car outside of a cemetery, and he wrote in notebooks.
Oprah Winfrey put House of Sand and Fog on her book club list in 2000, which led to more than 100 offers to option the book.
A lot of people called, and they were all interested in it for various reasons.
Vadim Perlman was a well-known TV commercial director, but House of Sand and Fog was his first feature.
I found this book in Rome airport, and read it on the plane, landed, and I said, I have to do this movie.
He's a great director. He's a genius, and I love the way he has turned the book into a screenplay.
A lot of people get caught in trying to be faithful to the book, and a lot of times they fail doing that, or they don't make a good film by doing that. I think what you need to do is try and get the emotional impact of the book.
This is a stolen house!
Jennifer Connelly plays Kathy. In the film, she's a recovering alcoholic, but in the book, she's a former drug addict.
Well, the book is sort of like having a character's diary.
In the book, Kathy was a lot harder, and she was just a little more trashier.
Nadi, do you remember our bungalow on the Caspian? How beautiful it was. I have bought for us another bungalow on the west side so that we may view the sea.
Ben Kingsley plays Colonel Behrani, an Iranian immigrant who buys Kathy's house.
When he goes to the US, he basically has to take a succession of really mundane jobs, including picking trash up off the highway, working in a gas station at night, but he hides this from his family.
Things are not as they appear. It is a matter of necessity for me and my family.
Mr. Behrani has bought a house to try to restart the American dream for his family, to restart all the road to affluence that they thought they were on when they lived in Iran.
It probably is a universal figure, the patriarch who's determined to be the greatest breadwinner, father, husband, and householder he can possibly be.
Kingsley was nominated for an Oscar for playing Behrani.
Ben Kingsley is most well known for playing India's spiritual leader, Mahatma Gandhi. He very memorably and movingly plays a Jewish man in Schindler's List.
The calendar on my desk has the birthdays of our SS friends' wives and children. Don't forget to send something.
He's basically amazing at impersonating accents of all kinds and creeds.
I do have a reasonably good ear, and if I'm marinated in a particular environment, I can start to think things start to drift in, and I get certain physical mannerisms, certain cadences.
Shohreh Aghdashloo was nominated for a Best Supporting Actress Oscar as Bahrani's wife, Nadi.
This is your fault, Bahrani. You have done this.
She is Iranian. She fled Iran herself. So, I mean, the casting, I think, was brilliant.
The fact that she is Iranian and that she's an immigrant obviously made it more tangible for me to work on this character.
Please, our home! Please! Our home! The house is a symbol of how the American dream can get lost in the sand and fog.
We both pull the tension tighter and tighter and tighter in the film from our own very different directions.
I think it has a lot to do with judgment and the way that we judge people who aren't sort of living their lives the way we think they ought to. You know, people who are on the fringes, like my character who was an addict, like Sarben's character who was an immigrant, and how those people slip through the cracks.
When we return, lives are broken when memory fades.
I guess I found it kind of the most genuine love story I'd ever read.
Half the time I wander around looking for something which I know is very pertinent. I can't remember what it is.
Away from Her is a love story about Grant and Fiona, an old couple whose lives are broken by a tragic illness.
It wasn't about that sort of initial, young, dumb love. It was about the kind of love that had existed over decades where two people had failed each other and life had happened and something remained.
This love could not be closer at this time, and this is the way this should be at this particular time in life. We can't be certain this is what you're far too young.
Should the patient afflicted with the disease remain at home, the caregiver will very often be the spouse.
Away from Her is the story of a couple that had been married for 44 years, mostly happily. The woman develops early onset Alzheimer's. The story then becomes about him slowly seeing his wife drift away.
Away from Her is based on the 1999 short story The Bear Came Over the Mountain by Alice Munro.
Alice Munro is probably one of the very, very few authors whose works will live on after she is long gone. She's a brilliant short story writer. She's just a brilliant writer, period.
Actress Sarah Polley read Munro's short story in the New Yorker magazine while flying over the Atlantic.
Sarah Polley was so deeply affected by the story that she wept. She wept as she was reading it on an airplane, and she continued to weep, and she couldn't stop thinking about it.
It had such a huge emotional impact on me. I guess I found it kind of the most genuine love story I'd ever read. Sarah Polley really couldn't have picked a more difficult author to adapt a book from, because Alice Munro is reclusive. She doesn't like to talk to people. She hates to talk to the media, and she doesn't like her books being turned into films.
Polley wrote the screenplay and sent it to Munro for her blessing.
Alice Munro read it. She actually was amazed at how true to the original the script was, and she left Sarah Polley a voicemail telling her as much.
What's amazing, I think, about adapting something you respect that much is there are certain moments in the film that you never fall out of love with because they're not actually yours.
I've read a lot of stories and a lot of film scripts made from stories, and they're very rarely do they catch the essential essence of the thing with such delicacy as Sarah's done.
The decision to cast Julie Christie and Gordon Pinsent was easy for Polley.
I knew Julie from acting with her in a couple of films, and I was desperate to get her for the film, and it wasn't easy to convince her to do it, but over about an 8-month period I convinced her.
If you've seen Julie Christie in Darling, that's the memory you have of this incredibly beautiful, beautiful woman. And yet, as an aging actress, she did an incredible job with the character.
I never wanted to be away from her. She had the spark of life.
Gordon Pinsent is one of Canada's most beloved and venerable actors, and when he was offered the part of Grant, which was written with him in mind, he was 76 years old and was really taking it easy at that point.
I feel that if the good things are out there, and you know, I can take part, fine, and if not, fine. Don't go.
That's what is happening, Grant. It's happening right now.
In Away from Her, Fiona decides to check herself into a care facility to make life easier for Grant.
The care facility tells Grant that he can't come to see her for 30 days because she needs time to settle in.
Boy, it's a marvel, really, the way she's getting him up and out of that chair.
When Grant returns to the home, he finds Fiona has forgotten who he is and is now devoted to a patient called Aubrey.
You caught her at sort of a bad moment, involved in a game.
She isn't even playing.
Well, but her friend's playing, Aubrey.
They say with this disease, things become very spontaneous with people. So Julie walks right over there and plops herself down, you know, and just gets right in there with no inhibitions. And, you know, you see this guy sort of turn and look at her and go, wow, yeah.
Grant is heartbroken that he has lost Fiona's love.
I'm your husband. Fiona, it's Grant. We've been married for 45 years. He'll never find another love. Not like this. Nothing will ever be there for him this way. So maybe there's nothing, and that he was not counting on at all. How is your husband doing?
Okay.
He and my wife struck up quite a close friendship.
I heard about that.
Olympia Dukakis plays Marion, who is Aubrey's wife. She and Grant have to work out what's best for everyone.
They need to figure out what's going to happen to the rest of their lives as individuals.
Chooses finally, having spent a good part of her life and the first part of our movie in a resigned place, that she actually chooses, knows that there's a choice to be made, and that she can move towards happiness.
Action!
The 2006 film was Polly's first feature directing job.
It was obviously intimidating at first, but all of them were so unbelievably collaborative and made it so easy for me.
The way she handled herself on the set, you know, she's 27 years old. She was dealing with people who were in their 60s plus.
The film was faithful to Alice Munro's Southern Ontario setting.
Alice Munro sets her stories in small-town Ontario because that's, you know, that's her life, that's her experience.
It was, you know, important to me. I mean, it's an Alice Munro short story. I mean, I don't think there's any way to disguise it's in Canada.
Christy and Polly were both nominated for Oscars for Away from Her in 2008.
I think I sort of figured out what I want to do, so I couldn't be happier.
How do I look?
Just like always, just as you've always looked.
The characters in Away from Her respond bravely to their broken lives.
Love can be a very transcendent emotion that can help us to overcome challenges such as the ones that Fiona and Grant face in that story.
What if someone decided to recognize their fate and deal with it? And it is probably one of the hardest things that any of us can do, is when it comes up in front of us, is to recognize it and not run away from it, because I think we spend our time probably running away from what is our fate.
I think all we can aspire to in this situation is a little bit of grace.
When we return, a film brings the book, Angela's Ashes, to life.
I was weeping because of what they did.
It's the baby Jesus. And if you ever need anything, you should pray to him. Will you tell Jesus that we're hungry? Shut up!
Angela's Ashes is Frank McCourt's autobiography. It tells the story of his broken family in Ireland during the 30s and 40s.
Frank McCourt, the author, is describing his childhood in Limerick. It was a pathetic, poor childhood.
Angela is McCourt's mother. She faced a lifetime of hardship.
Her life becomes broken by her husband's alcoholism and inability to provide for their family, from the fact that she loses children to death, partly because of poverty, and her life just becomes more and more broken the older she gets.
This was a loving memory of a dreadful childhood and of a strong woman who managed to keep it together.
You're never to let anybody slam the door in your face again. Do you hear me?
I do.
McCourt was working as an English teacher in New York when he decided to write Angela's Ashes.
He used to tell stories of his life to his students, and never thinking that they would find them particularly interesting. But when they did, he thought, oh, maybe this is worthwhile putting down on paper.
I thought I'd write it and get it out of my system and maybe contact some of my former students who were in the publishing business. And maybe some small press would do a little private printing.
McCourt's book was published in 1996. It was an immediate sensation.
It spent 117 weeks on the bestseller list, and there are 8 million copies in print.
When I wrote Angela's Ashes, I never imagined it would be published, never mind being made into a film. Because while I was writing, I was thinking, what am I going to do with this thing? Actually, I had to write it, and I thought I might put it into a drawer.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.
Alan Parker, who has experience turning biographies into film, directed Angela's Ashes.
He was nominated for an Academy Award for the 1978 movie Midnight Express, which was based on a man's experiences being imprisoned in a Turkish jail for drug smuggling.
When we went into Midnight Express, it was a different situation. With regards to this, maybe I've learned over the years. I'm very faithful to this book. I don't think there's anyone's going to be at all surprised by who. If you love the book, I hope you love the film.
Nobody could have done what he did. Nobody had his vision. Nobody had his feel.
What do you want most in the world?
To go to America.
The book spans the first 19 years of McCourt's life, which presented a casting challenge for Parker. He used 3 different boys to play the growing Frank.
We did open calls for young kids by putting advertisements in newspapers, on the radio, on TV, sticking up a piece of paper on lampposts. We saw about 15,000 we were actually read.
It was privileged working with Alan Parker for my first film, and he was really a fantastic director.
The author liked Joe Breen in the role of young Frank.
When I look at Joe's face, I'm looking at myself at that age, scowling out of the world. That's the way it was. There's a picture in the front of Angela's Ashes of me in the class, scowling, just the way Joe scowled.
Emily Watson plays the title role. She met McCourt to ask about his mother, Angela.
I said, is there anything you want to tell me about your mother? And he said, no. I said, let's have a pint then. Frank gave us the book. I didn't want to quiz him about his mum.
In Emily's case, it was that grim desperation, but leavened with the good humour that my mother had, and her tenderness. You could see the way she was in the movie, the way my mother was with us, that she was protective.
This baby's sick and he needs a hot drink. Now, if you're too grand to pick coal up the road, I'm not.
She was trapped, and Emily gives off, and even the sets give you this feeling of a woman trapped. And the way Emily portrayed my mother gives you this feeling.
The dole is 19 shillings and the rent is 6, and that leaves 13 shillings to feed and clothe 5 people.
There are so many people out there who have a very impassioned vision of what this book should be like, that I really had to walk away and make it my own.
Jobs are scarce, you know.
Drank the money, Dad. You drank the money.
Robert Carlyle plays Frank's shiftless father, Malachi.
It seemed to me to be very wrong to paint Malachi as the villain. On the one hand, he does some bad stuff, but on the other, maybe he's his victim as well, you know.
The thing he loves most is the bottle. That, as my mother said, he chose the bottle over the babies. And that was his tragedy, and that was our tragedy, because we were driven to desperation, and my mother was driven to beggary.
What I'm trying to do with the guy is to make you think twice about him, that he ain't so much, you know, the bad guy in the piece. The bad guy in the piece is the society which allows these conditions to exist, surely.
Carlyle's sympathetic approach to Malachi stemmed from a conversation with the author.
He said, oh, I really loved my father. He said, I always loved my father. You know? And when he said that, I thought, I only spoke to him for 30 minutes. Didn't need any more than that.
I loved having my dad to myself in the morning. I loved his stories where motor cars and planes went underwater.
I think he took a lot of his love for literature and romantic writings from his father's very, very vivid imagination.
The stories were all around us because we didn't have anything else. There was no television, no radio, very few books, newspapers. So everybody told the story. Talk the mouth was the most frequently used organ in Ireland.
Come in. Couple of drowning rats. Get your wet clothes off, dry yourself by the fire.
McCourt describes his childhood as wet from the rain. That meant there had to be a lot of water on set.
Wet socks. It's my internal memory of the whole thing. People blowing their nose every 2 minutes. No, it was a very happy shoot, but it was a very wet and cold shoot, you know.
Costume people coming over had different shoes, we had different socks, make sure they were warm, toasty and everything.
Recreating mid-century slums in modern Ireland was a challenge. The country has changed greatly since Frank's childhood.
Finding the world that, you know, Frank lived in is very difficult there because most of the slums have been got rid of.
So in order to recreate it and get that authenticity, they shot in many different parts of Ireland, and when they couldn't find a street that looked right, then they would basically build a set.
I nearly fell down. It was so authentic. I was back there and I was trembling. They had it up on a platform where you had to go up the stairs. I was coming down, I was weeping because of what they did.
You might be poor, your shoes might be broken, but your mind is a palace.
Angela's Ashes is about daring to dream even when hope seems impossible.
The message that he's trying to send with the book is that we can overcome terrible circumstances, no matter what they are, and go on to lead lives of our own choosing and our own making.
The only thing that is never, ever broken in Angela's Ashes is Angela herself. Yeah, her life was broken, but she wasn't. She prevailed. She prevailed and made do the best she could.
How did she manage? She hung on. That's all you could do in those days, dreaming of escape.
From a seaside house to a retirement home to a slum in Ireland, their lives were broken by cruel fate.
When things don't go the way people plan for them to go, often they can end up in a spiral that takes them down and down and down.
We've all felt disappointment. We've all felt that things are not going as they should.
What I would hope that audience will go home with is this humanitarian message of let us be compassionate towards each other. Let us understand each other.